who claims that black homeowners had to pay higher interest rates on their home loans due to the fact that they were declared a risk by the financial institutions. Morning Live invited the National Credit Regulator, or NCR, and in response they sent the following statement, so we'll read it for you verbatim. It has been brought to the attention of the NCR that the affected credit agreements were concluded before the promulgation and coming into effect of the National Credit Act 34 of 2005. And as such, the allegations relating to overcharging on interest rates fall outside the mandate of the NCR. And that's where the statement ended. However, we do have in studio with us this morning Tenzi Mabuza, the Deputy Commissioner at the National Consumer Commission, and Dr. Raynauld Russon, who is the Secretary General of the National Black Consumer Council, which of course is a civil society organization representing the voice of consumers. To my guests, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Let me begin by asking, Tenzi, if you don't mind, just as the National Consumer Commission, what the National Consumer, the NCR, has told us, that they're saying allegations relating to overcharging on interest rates fall outside the mandate of the NCR. Is that true? Does it fall outside their mandate?
It is within their mandate, but then in terms of the rules of prescription, you can file a complaint wherein the incident and dispute happened within that particular period. So if the incident happened before they came into force, then that would mean that then it would fall outside their mandate. But if the Act is continuing in that case, because the Act would actually at times also give a period in which some of the contracts would actually come into force or maybe be applicable. In this instance, I wouldn't be talking on their behalf, but I'll talk on in relation to the Consumer Protection Act, wherein it gave us almost 2 years to say that contracts that were still in force within that 2 years will still be covered within that particular act, within the Consumer Protection Act.
Okay, so let's now look at the case at hand here. If banks assess individuals as high risk, then are they being prudent, not prejudiced? Okay, that I suppose is a starting point for a conversation.
Yes, and for us now, we are in the period, the month of consumer rights, of actually human rights. And human rights, looking at it as well, is also part of a consumer right. Now, when you look at the Consumer Protection Act, which is an act of general application, the principles in the Consumer Protection Act applies to all the sectors in the market, even if in this area it's already a regulated industry, like the Credit Act, regulated by the National Credit Regulator and also by the Financial Sector Credit Authority in this case. The Consumer Protection Act, in Section 8 of our Act, it speaks of the right of equality in the market space. That means that any supplier of any other service cannot discriminate on a particular group, on a particular sector of consumers based on all the elements that are given within Section 9 of the Constitution. So that means that Act enshrined in the Constitution, it now has been also exported into the Consumer Protection Act, cutting across all industries.
Yeah, which it would do, because it's a fine line though. And Raynauld, let me bring you into this conversation, because we bring up three words: prudent, banks being prudent, not prejudiced. However, when we look at what has been exposed, and this is basically looking at a collective group, simply a black consumer, this is discriminatory at the end of the day.
Well, to us it does appear to be discriminatory. The criteria itself is premised on a prejudicial platform. The Act, the National Credit Act, Section 61, if I can read it verbatim.
Please, yes.
To you, it says, relative to the treatment of any other consumer or prospective consumer, a credit provider must not unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly against any natural person, juristic person, or association of persons on one or more grounds set out in Section 9.3 of the Constitution, or one or more grounds set out in Chapter 2 of the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act, when determining any aspect of the cost of a credit agreement to the consumer. So to us, it does appear like there is discrimination.
Yeah.
And we've always harbored the impression over a long period of time that banks and all other financial institutions have been practicing unfair discrimination against black consumers.
You know, there have been allegations, and I'm going to quote, because at the center of all of this is a guy named Emerald Van Zyl, and he's the one that's come forward with all of these revelations and facts that he's saying he's a financial investigating consultant, and he worked with Special Assignment and also gave them information. I mean, he is saying that it's the entire financial sector, not just banks. It's funeral cover, life cover, motor insurance. There are many other aspects that speak to this discriminatory behavior. Have you been aware of it?
Leanne, not in particular. For us, actually, it's more in the background. It's a buzzword because we haven't received any complaint that has been filed with the Commission, because in this case, if it's a matter of public interest, like maybe with the association now that would actually want to file that complaint, they have to apply for a leave at the tribunal to approach us, because this is actually a regulated sector by two authorities in these instances. So the Act allows us that even if it's regulated, and then they would approach us, we will still now be able to investigate, but then we would actually go to our other two regulators and rope them in, because our Act is of general application, but they would have to seek leave with the tribunal to file a complaint with us.
So are you saying that, just to get this on the record, you are not aware of any of this that's been happening? You have never received a formal complaint, and this is something new to you?
It's not really new, Leanne. It has been happening, as I'm saying, that we have heard that. But as the Commission, though we hear about it because there are sector regulators that are specific to the Act, it's their mandate to act. But then if maybe like an institution like them would like to file a complaint with us, they would have to approach the tribunal first in the public interest. And then is then that we can really do something about the matter. But we'll still have to rope in the two regulators that are involved in the matter.
But this has been going on for years, from what I'm understanding here, that this is nothing new. It's something that's been around for a long time, and yet it's been allowed to carry on. Would you like to add your voice to this as well?
Yeah, I think the National Credit Act, to some degree, does give banks some latitude to set the criteria on credit risk. Section 61.5 A does give the banks that kind of latitude. And I think this needs to be open for public discussion. We have written to the National Credit Regulator requesting them to use the powers entrusted in them by the Act to institute an investigation into FNB in accordance with the Banking Act of 1990. So we are expecting them to do that.
Yeah.
And we've also written to the President to set up a judicial commission of inquiry to look at the entire financial sector. Because like you rightfully pointed out, it's not just the banks. The insurance industry too is guilty as charged, because their criteria stipulates that black consumers are high risk, and the places where they live are high risk areas. So they end up paying more for their insurance policies than otherwise.
And whose fault is that? You know, being pushed out into areas like that. I mean, we do have to go back to the apartheid planning, spatial planning, and being forced to live in areas like that, and being punished for living in areas that are so far from a city and that are unsafe, and that, you know, it's been a big failure to not correct those mistakes, and yet people are still paying for it, and even on a monetary basis, some with their lives and some now with more money. I mean, I'm reading a story of somebody who bought a house for 91,000 Rand, but the bank told him that he's now close to 200,000 Rand in arrears because, you know, this is the interest that's been accumulated.
Can I come into that one? Because
Please.
There is the in duplum rule, which says that a credit provider should not charge more than the capital loan amount. So, for instance, if you take 100,000 Rand loan from a credit provider, you should not pay more than 100,000 Rand in interest rate, which means you cannot pay in total more than 200,000. The Constitutional Court has made a ruling on this, but obviously it has allowed some gaps and banks are using those gaps to charge more. People end up paying more than the in duplum rule, which I think needs to be opened more for public discussion.
Certainly does.
Also. Yeah.
And for us, actually, as the National Consumer Commission, in terms of, protecting consumers in general, what we have is that with the onset of the Consumer Protection Act in 2011, we had an exemption already for all the financial services that was applicable for a period of 2 years. But then in 2013, we have the Financial Services Law General Amendment Act 45 of 2013 that exempted the application of the Consumer Protection Act from all financial services. But on that, actually, the proviso was that the Act itself will actually provide protection that's comparable or even higher than the Consumer Protection Act. But in this instance, some areas wherein we are looking at it and looking at the practices that we see that actually they are in conflict. So once because those now we see that they are in conflict, it's for us now to actually track or look at the market and go back to the minister and say, on these areas and that area, we think that the practices or the protection given to consumers in this instance is not on par with the principle of the Consumer Protection Act.
Give us a bit of an understanding here. Do banks fall out of the jurisdiction of the NCC? Do they not fall under the jurisdiction of the Financial Sector Conduct Authority?
Yes, they do. But then remember, in the beginning, when the Consumer Protection Act applies in general to all transactions in the country, but then they were given exemption. The exemption was granted on the proviso that when they come up with the Financial Services Laws General Amendment Act 45 of 2013, that the protection of all the principles that are carried within the Consumer Protection Act will still apply to the banking sector over the financial sector, so that consumers in all the spheres in South Africa get equal application, or given equal protection as it will be actually espoused in the Consumer Protection Act.
So the gentleman that we spoke about at the beginning of the interview, Emerald Van Zyl, he said he's already approached the Equality Court on this matter. I suppose the question that needs to be asked here is there a possibility of a class action regarding this particular case? And what rights do consumers have? I don't know who wants to talk to that one.
Yes, when people want to actually have a class action, they've got to have leave to actually file a complaint. And with us here, because it's a credit act that they would be talking to or maybe to the financial sector, it depends on which route they want to follow. If maybe, let's say, it's that fellow and then supported with by your agency, that would mean that they can still apply, go through the national the tribunal for the credit, our own tribunal, which is the national tribunal for us that deals with both credit and consumer protection matters. Just get that leave to file a complaint, and then they can then file a complaint because it's a lawsuit either with the credit regulator or with ourselves, depending on which route they would like to follow. But the tribunal will be able to guide on that.
Yeah, I mean, this would be a massive lawsuit, in fact, if it does, in fact, go ahead. Let's get your reaction. We know that the Black Business Council are going to be meeting with the banks. There's been a huge outcry after this expose, perhaps a little bit too late, but nonetheless, it sounds like things are being done now. What are you asking for? What would you personally like to be seen done, or your organization as well?
I think as a starting point, we would like to see more commitment on the side of the state. The National Consumer Commission, for instance, is underfunded to such an extent that they cannot do much of the work in terms of consumer education. We approached them for funding because we need funding to do consumer education, and they told us they do not have money. So it shows us that there is little commitment in terms of the role and the rights of the consumer. And we are saying, as the NBCC, it's time that the black consumer has a voice, and we are going to provide that voice. We are saying to our people out there, organize on the ground. The masses must come together, form branches of the NBCC. We've got to now take action into our own hands and make sure that we take this country to a different level in terms of consumer rights.
All right.
So we would like to see more action in that space.
Unfortunately, we do have to leave it here at this point, but I know that there's much more to this. Something that's been described as the greatest cover-up in the history of South African banking over 10 years is something that was at the core of an investigation of special assignment. I know more is going to happen, and there's been huge complaints about this, and certainly with due course, hopefully something will be done about it. Thank you so much for talking to us here on Morning Live, joined by the National Consumer Commission, the Deputy Commissioner, Tenzi Mabuza, and Dr. Raynauld, who is the Secretary General of the National Black Consumer Council. Just gone 7. Let's get your news.